はい、では午後2件目の招待講演に移ります。本招待講演の司会を務めさせていただきます、農学研究員、Q-AOS 資源循環クラスターの太田と申します。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。それではご講演者のアンナ・カクソーネン博士をご紹介させていただきたいと思います。カクソーネン博士は、2004年フィンランドのタンペレ工科大学にて博士工学の学位を取得され、同大学で10年間勤務をされた後、2009年にオーストラリアに渡りまして、オーストラリア最大の総合研究機関であります、CSIRO、オーストラリア連邦科学産業研究機構のチームリーダーに就任されました。現在はインダストリアル・バイオテクノロジーグループのグループリーダーとして、鉱物、エネルギー、水供給、廃棄物や排水処理などに関わるバイオプロセスの研究開発、微生物を用いた金属資源の循環に関する研究開発などを精力的に行っておられます。また先月末にオーストラリアのパースで開催されました国際ハイドロメタラジーシンポジウム IBS2022 の実行委員長を務められるなど、この分野で大変ご活躍されております。今回のご講演では、Biotechnical processes for metal extraction and recovery from spent batteries and printed circuit boards のタイトルでお話をいただきます。なお、Zoom の画面下に表示されている通訳ボタンで、同時通訳の視聴が可能になります。質問はチャットボックスにお寄せください。それでは、カクソーネ博士、よろしくお願いいたします。
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and I would like to also thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give this presentation. So my name is Anna Kaksonen, and I would like to also acknowledge my co-authors and colleagues, Jonna Van Jyken, Naomi Boxall, Giles Calvert, and Kayu Cheng. And today I'll talk about biotechnical processes for metal extraction and recovery from spent batteries and circuit boards. Before I go into the actual topic, I would like to briefly introduce CSIRO from where I come. And so CSIRO stands for Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, and it is Australia's national science agency with over 5,000 people working out of over 50 centers, both in Australia as well as some also internationally. CSIRO is a trusted advisor for government, industry, and the community. And it operates through 3 lines of business, which include impact science, national facilities and collections, as well as CSIRO services. And my role in CSIRO is a group leader for industrial biotechnology. And with our group, we develop biotechnical and environmental engineering solutions for sustainable industries, value recovery from wastes, pollution prevention and remediation. And with this, we aim to provide economic value, decrease the environmental footprint, and improve human and ecosystem health. In our lifetime, we consume a huge amount of various resources, including various metals such as copper, zinc, lead, and so forth, as well as other minerals and energy. This slide shows the average consumption of an American-born person, what they would need in a lifetime. And as you can see, it's quite a lot. So our lifestyle is quite resource demanding. And as we also transition to greener energy alternatives such as wind energy, as well as then the use of electric vehicles, there's increasing need for various critical metals and other elements. So the graph on the left here shows the global new and cumulative wind turbine capacity installation, and you can see how it is growing quite rapidly. And the graph on the right-hand side shows projected global electric vehicle sales. And this drives the need for certain type of metals. On the other hand, there's the challenge of declining ore grades. So this graph shows the grades of various ores in Australia over the past years. And it shows that the grades of various ores such as copper, gold, lead, zinc, and uranium, as well as nickel, have been declining over time. And this causes challenges to the mining industries as they need to extract metals from lower grade and increasingly complex ores. And so also the mining industry loses some of the metal as they process it. So this graph shows how there are various metal losses in the processing of the ores, as well as then once the metals are made into products and consumers use them. So after primary ores have been processed to, for example, concentrates and metal alloys, so there are leakages of metals from all those processes, as well as then once the metals end up in products, there's further waste. And to minimize the loss of metals from our material cycles, we should aim to recover metals as much as possible from each of these steps, including also the post-consumer wastes, to minimize the impacts of waste to our environment, and on the other hand, complement the declining ore grades. And electronic waste is one waste stream which has quite high content of metals, and therefore there's increasing interest to extract value from those. According to the Global E-Waste Monitor 2019, a total of 53.6 megatons of e-waste was generated globally. And this was estimated to be worth $57 billion worth of raw materials. So there's a lot of value in the e-waste, and the extraction of value from e-waste is often called urban mining, and that can help us to help to move towards a more circular economy. This slide shows some further statistics on e-waste and its generation and recycling. So the first graph A on the top left side shows the amount of e-waste generated on various continents or regions. And so Asia is the top or highest generator, whereas Oceania, where Australia is located, is quite low overall. But then on the second graph in the B bottom left, you can see the e-waste generation per capita. And there Oceania is one of the highest in addition to Europe. So per capita, we produce a lot of e-waste as we are quite intensive users of various electronics. And the last graph here in panel C shows the percentage of e-waste that was recycled in 2019. Europe was leading that to great extent. Over 42% was recycled in Europe, whereas in Oceania it was only 8.8% at the time. And in Australia also, not all e-waste is yet recycled, and the ones that are collected, quite a lot of it is shipped actually overseas for e-waste recycling. So this graph shows the percentage of e-waste that is, or the portions of e-waste that's exported to other countries for recycling. And so Japan is one of the receiving countries also, and others are, for example, China, Indonesia, as well as South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and India. And so one challenge in Australia is that the country is very large, whereas the e-waste volumes have been relatively small, and in comparison to the land mass, and that has caused challenges for processing the e-waste in the country, especially using traditional processing methods such as pyrometallurgy, which require large feedstocks. And because of this challenge, we have been aiming to develop some alternative processing technologies that could be used also for smaller feedstock flows. And biotechnology is one such alternative. So biotechnology has been used a long time already for processing mineral ores and concentrates to extract value from low-grade ores and concentrates. And there's increasing interest to use biotechnology also for extracting value from e-waste. And biomining mimics what's already happening in the nature in terms of weathering processes and solubilization of metals. And the processes are quite simple and therefore can have relatively low capital and operating expenses, and therefore can improve the economies of scale for processing smaller feedstocks. And therefore, biomining can have the potential to convert uneconomic resources to reserves. And it can also be suitable for some materials that have impurities such as arsenic, which would cause penalties, for example, in smelters. And biotechnology has also potential to reduce environmental impacts. So how does the biomining then work? So the microbial capabilities that are harnessed for e-waste biomining include, so the biomining term as such, so it refers to the use of microorganisms for extraction and recovery of metals from minerals and wastes. And it includes bioleaching, so using microorganisms for the solubilization of metals from solids through redoxolysis, acidolysis, and complexolysis. So redoxolysis refers to redox processes such as oxidation or reduction. Acidolysis refers to the use of biologically generated acids, whether they are organic or inorganic acids. And complexolysis refers to the use of biologically formed complexing agents to help to increase the solubility and leaching of metals. Bioprecipitation is another approach or process that microbes can help to catalyze, and here the microbes are used to facilitate the precipitation of elements to help their recovery. Here are some examples of the reactions that are involved in bioleaching. So the most commonly used microbes are chemolithoautotrophic microbes that gain energy from oxidizing ferrous iron or reduced sulfur compounds, and that produce ferric iron as an oxidant, or protons, so acid, for acid leaching. And the ferric iron and protons then leach metals chemically. So the first reaction shows the ferrous iron oxidation with microbes, so that's a biocatalyzed reaction. And the second one then shows metal leaching with the ferric-based lixiviant. The third reaction, which is shown with green, is another biocatalyzed reaction, and that shows sulfur oxidation to sulfuric acid or protons. And then the fourth reaction shows the use of the sulfuric acid to leach metals. And as an alternative, then more recently, people have been exploring the use of iodide oxidizing microbes to oxidize iodide to iodine, and thereby facilitate gold leaching through the reaction shown on this slide. So this would be an alternative to using, for example, cyanide as the lixiviant, as cyanide can be quite harmful for the environment. So here the first reaction shown on the green shows the oxidation of the iodide to iodine, which then reacts with iodide to form 3-iodide. And then there's two other reactions that show how gold can react with iodide and 3-iodide to form stable complexes. And for recovering metals from the leachates, so we can use, for example, biological sulfate reduction-based processes. So here the first reaction shows biological reduction of sulfate with ethanol as electron donor. So typically we need to add some kind of electron and carbon source for these microbes so that they can generate hydrogen sulfide, which then chemically precipitates metals as metal sulfides, which is shown in the second reaction. And so technically, biomining can help to extract value from batteries and other e-waste, but there are some challenges that we need to overcome. And this slide shows some of those. And so firstly, the composition of batteries as well as other e-waste is quite heterogeneous. So there's a lot of variation from with different types of batteries, for example. So the graph graphs on the bottom left side show, for example, 3 different types of batteries. And so as you can see, the composition can vary from one type to another quite a lot. And this the batteries and other e-waste also can have plastics and other additives which complicate then the analysis of the e-waste. The labeling of various e-waste can also be a bit insufficient, and therefore the sorting of the e-waste can be challenging. And in terms of batteries, there can also be safety and fire risk issues if the batteries have not been discharged before processing. So usually some kind of pre-processing is required before value can be extracted, and this often then includes discharging for batteries, and then manual dismantling, for example, for computers, and then also typically size reduction, for example, through shredding and milling, before then leaching can occur. And so especially the manual dismantling can be quite labor intensive, and that can increase the cost. So that causes some challenges for economic feasibility of the processing. And additional challenge is also the recovery of metals from complex leach liquors if there are multiple metals at relatively small concentrations. When using biomining, there are a few additional challenges. So, for example, because of the complex waste composition, there can be contaminants present, some of which might inhibit the microbial activity. And so toxicity issues may be a challenge. And then also because of that, the pulp density of the e-waste in the leaching system might need to be relatively low, which means that we may need to use bigger tanks, for example, for leaching. The plastics that are present in e-waste also consume acid and can restrict metal liberation. And sometimes the e-waste also has low concentrations of substrates for microbes to use. And as compared to, for example, smelting, microbes typically have lower kinetics, or their activity rate is lower, and therefore longer residence time or leaching time may be required, which again affects economic feasibility. But there are some ways to overcome some of these challenges, and one is to uncouple the biological leaching agent or lixiviant generation and the leaching unit processes. And this can help to avoid, for example, inhibition from the high metal concentrations and other contaminants. And when we separate the unit processes, then it's possible to increase the solid-liquid ratio in the leaching step, and each of the unit processes can be separately optimized. In terms of how the leaching and the biolixiviant production are conducted, the leaching processes can be divided to one-step, two-step, and spent medium bioleaching. In the one-step process, the biolixiviant production and the e-waste leaching are conducted in the same unit process at the same time. Whereas then in the two-step process, the biolixiviant production is separated either spatially or temporally from the e-waste bioleaching, and this can then help to minimize the toxicity of the e-waste to microbes. A third approach is to use spent medium bioleaching, and in this case, the microbial cells are separated from the biolixiviant before the lixiviant is then used for leaching. And this also helps to avoid toxicity. A fourth approach is to use sequencing batch process to leach metals from e-waste with biogenic lixiviants. And this can help if the metal concentrations of the first leaching step are not high, or the leaching yields are not very, very high. So in this case, the same batch of e-waste is leached with multiple aliquots of the bioleach or of the biolixiviant. So first the e-waste is, for example, put in the reactor vessel, and biolixiviant is added, and it's the e-waste is then allowed to become leached, and then the e-waste is settled, and lixiviant or the leaching solution is decanted, and the new aliquot of the biolixiviant is added, and that can be repeated multiple times until sufficient metal leaching yield is achieved. Other approaches to improve e-waste bioleaching include, for example, the use of mixed microbial cultures, as mixed cultures are often more robust than pure cultures. And microbes can also be, to some extent, adapted to high metal concentrations by stepwise increasing the metal concentration in the culture media. When the e-waste does not contain enough substrates for the microbes, external ferrous iron or sulfur or pyrite can be used as a substrate and mixed with the e-waste or used in a separate vessel to produce the biolixiviant. Sometimes the addition of complexing agents, for example, organic acids, can also help to increase the metal solubility, especially if the e-waste is very acid consuming and tends to increase the pH. And next, I'll then show a few case studies from some of the work we have conducted at CSIRO for bioleaching metals from both batteries as well as printed circuit boards. So in this case, we collaborated with VTT from Finland, and one-step bioleaching of e-waste was studied in shake flasks. And the effects of various parameters such as inoculum addition, substrate addition, pulp density, pH, and sodium chloride addition were evaluated. And the small table on the right-hand side shows the composition of the e-waste. So there was iron, copper, nickel, zinc, and lead present. And the large table shows the leaching yields. Usually after 64 days of bioleaching at 1% pulp density unless otherwise stated. And the leaching was done with Acidithiobacillus and Leptospirillum species. And as you can see from the table, the leaching yields varied quite a bit depending on what pH was used and the addition of substrates or sodium chloride and whether inoculum was present or not. Highest leaching yields was obtained for zinc when microbes were added, and both ferrous iron and sulfur as well as sodium chloride supplementation was used at pH of 1.5. In another study, we collaborated with the University of Cape Town as well as Curtin University. And in this case, two-step bioleaching was explored for printed circuit board waste. And the leaching was tested at various pulp densities from 1 to 20. And copper leaching was clearly affected by the pulp density, likely due to compromised ferrous iron oxidation, whereas nickel and zinc leaching were not affected too much by the pulp density. And therefore, nickel and zinc likely were leached with the acid rather than required ferric iron. And due to the heterogeneous nature of the PCB, some of the copper yields were even over 100%. So this highlights the challenge with the very complex and heterogeneous nature of the PCB. And in this study, no chromium or tin leaching were detected. In another study, one-step, two-step, and spent medium bioleaching were explored for gold from e-waste with iodide oxidizing microbes. And so here we got some gold leaching, but the leaching yields overall were quite low. And so some challenges were, for example, that I think the redox potential and the pH were not so stable. So further optimization is required for the use of biogenic iodide-based lixiviant. In another study, then bioleaching of metals from lithium-ion batteries was explored with batch and sequential batch leaching, either with just biogenic ferric iron or biogenic sulfuric acid, or both. And in some cases also small amount of sulfuric acid was added. And the leaching yields varied quite a bit for the different types of metals. Overall, the addition of small amount of acid could increase the efficiency of the biolixiviants. And so sometimes we may require both biological as well as chemical methods to have efficient leaching. Oops, sorry. And then we have also explored the recovery of the metals from the leachates from the lithium-ion battery study. And this shows the sulfate-reducing bioreactor setup. It was a fluidized bed reactor. And then the hydrogen sulfide was separated from the bioreactor effluent and used to precipitate metals as metal sulfides, or in the case of aluminium, likely hydroxides. And the graph on the top right shows the remaining metal in solution over time. So the different metals tended to precipitate at different times, so depending on the solubility products of the metals. And the last graph on the bottom right shows the purity index of the various metals obtained at different pHs, as the pH was stepwise increased in the metal precipitation unit. So you can see that different metals tend to precipitate at different pHs, and this can potentially help to separate them, although in this case the separation was not very efficient. Biotechnology can also help to enable industrial ecology and symbiosis. So where the waste from one industry becomes the resource for another one. And this concept we explored in one recent project where Jonavan was our PhD student, and he utilized waste sulfur as a source to generate biogenic lixiviants for leaching printed circuit boards. And then he also used waste organic carbon glycerol from biodiesel industry as the electron and carbon source for biological hydrogen sulfide generation to then recover metals from the leachates. And so this shows the flow sheet that Jonavan explored in his work. So first, biological sulfur oxidation was used to generate acidic lixiviant, and then ferrous iron was added to the reactor effluent and to generate biogenic ferric iron. And then the biogenic lixiviant that contained both acid and ferric iron was used to leach metals from milled printed circuit boards. And this one just shows some of the operating conditions for the sulfur oxidizing bioreactor. So it was a stirred tank reactor, and Acidithiobacillus caldus was used as the key microbe. And here are some details for the iron oxidizing reactor. So in this case, Acidithiobacillus ferrooxidans was the key microbe added. And here you can see the reactors as a photograph. So sulfur oxidizing reactor on the left and iron oxidizing reactor on the right. And then the lixiviant was used for leaching the milled PCB powder. And Jonavan explored then, for example, the effects of temperature on metal leaching, and increasing temperature slightly increased leaching yields for copper, nickel, aluminium, and zinc. And whereas then aeration didn't have a notable effect, especially when he was using just 1% pulp density. It might have a higher effect when using higher pulp densities, but at least in this case, it didn't have a clear effect. He also then explored the effect of pH control on metal leaching, and it clearly enhanced the leaching yields. So here the gray graph shows the pH controlled results for leaching. And he also then tested the sequential leaching. So after the leaching had plateaued, he changed the biolixiviant and achieved further leaching of the metals with the new batch of biolixiviant. And he also then explored ashing as a pre-treatment to see if that could help to liberate more metals, and that also clearly enhanced the bioleaching of metals from the e-waste. And Jonavan then also used the sulfate-reducing bioreactor to recover metals from the leachates. economically also feasible, and then also to partner with industry for possible pilot scale testing. So a summary, so some of the benefits of biotechnical metal extraction from e-waste are listed here. So the bioprocesses can operate at low temperatures and ambient pressures, and like, for example, smelting or roasting. There's also reduced hazardous air emissions, and the bioprocesses can be scaled to suit the e-waste feedstock flows. And we can also use other wastes as inputs for bioexcipient generation to reduce the costs. Each unit process can also be optimized separately, and they can complement existing e-waste processing operations, and can also be applied to other metal-containing wastes, such as mining and metallurgical wastes. And finally, I would like to acknowledge our funding from the New South Wales government through the Environmental Trust, as well as then the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation through the New Industries Fund, as well as funding from CSIRO and Murdoch, and e-waste was provided through Total Green Recycling and MRI. And finally, I would like to thank you all for your attention and interest for the talk. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for your great presentation. So, どうもありがとうございました。まずですね、ご質問の方はチャットで質問をお願いします。あとですね、アンナさん、少し、there is an internet problem and we cannot see the slide number 39. Could you show the number 39 slide again?
Number 39. Okay, let me.
At that time, some internet connection is stopped. So.
Okay. Let me try to find which one was the 39.
Sulfate reduced.
I think this one. This one.
Reactor or the metal. This one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you explain briefly again?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, can you see my mouse cursor? So the FBR is the fluidized bed reactor. So that was sulfate-reducing bioreactor where the microbes were generating hydrogen sulfide when they were supplemented with a carbon and electron donor. Initially, we used lactate to start the reactor, and then later on glycerol, waste glycerol. And then, so here the inorganic media was fed, and organic media, so the organic substrate to the bioreactor, and then there was a recycle flow also, and then in this other vessel called SSR, so there nitrogen sparging was used to then separate hydrogen sulfide as gas from this bioreactor effluent, and the hydrogen sulfide gas was then used to precipitate metals in this third vessel here, so that where the leaching liquor was put so that the metals could be precipitated and recovered from the e-waste leachate.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
ありがとうございました。なんかその我々が身近に使っているような電池とかですね、電子基板がこうどういうふうにそこからメタルが抽出されてくるかっていうのがこうなんていうんですか、ドキドキするようなすごく面白いご発表でした。大変勉強になりました。ありがとうございます。質問はございますでしょうか。
Keiko speaking. May I ask question during waiting the question from audience? Thank you very much for introducing the biomining and bio leaching of precious metal, rare metals from e-waste in your research group activity at CSIRO. The chemical form of rare metal, precious metal in e-waste is mostly oxide form, or elemental form, oxide form.
I think quite often can be elemental forms, and but when it was ashed, so during the ashing process, so I think then many of the metals convert to oxide forms, and I think that is why then we saw enhanced leaching after the ashing, because I think the oxides are then more easily solubilized with the acid, and they don't require further oxidation.
The most microorganisms are known to produce organic acid, which provide a proton and some organic ligand for metals. So there is advantage to apply biotechnology to to hydrometallurgy of urban mine e-waste. So, but in fact, in e-waste, mostly these metals is existing as a complex with plastics. So, in your opinion, how do you think before applying leaching, biomining, plastics should be removed or grind together, mixed in bio-leaching tank?
So there could be potential advantages if the plastics can be removed. So that would reduce the acid consumption by the plastics and potentially some toxic effects to microbes. And but I guess that would then require more pre-processing of the e-waste. So you would need additional unit processes, which would be another cost factor. So I think a thorough techno-economic analysis would be required to then determine which option is more economical in terms of then when considering the leaching yields and rates and the various capital and economic costs. So it's hard to give a clear answer, but so there are pros and cons.
Previous invited speaker talked about biodegradable plastics.
Oh, okay,
yeah. So in his talk, he produced how to produce biodegradable plastics. So if both processes combined, it's a sequential bioprocess.
That's a very interesting concept. So I think there's growing interest in using biotechnical or bioplastics production, and especially if then using those bioplastics that are more easily biodegraded. So then that would help to, I guess, also alleviate the problems with the e-waste processing. If there would be another biotechnical unit process that could be added to then degrade the bioplastics.
In some products, the biodegradable plastics is produced using enzyme. Enzyme is originally mixed in plastics. So when plastics is break down, the enzyme is activated to degrade plastics. This is a concept, in the previous talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, very interesting.
Also, it was interesting to know the gold extraction using iodine. It's a little bit complicated sequential reaction, but using maybe seawater, maybe iodine is included. So this process might be developed.
That could be one idea to test. So very good thought.
You pointed out one challenging issue: heterogeneity in e-waste. So, even in one product, did you notice large heterogeneity?
There can be a lot of variation, and also some of the e-waste is not very easy to mill to fine particle size, because some of the shields can sort of bend, and they they can't be ground to very fine. And if the particle size is larger, that causes then also a bit more variability. So often then, I guess it's recommended that the leaching yields could be then calculated based on the metal concentrations in the leachate as well as in the actual residue, rather than using another assay of another lot of e-waste as the basis for calculating the metal content. So because of the variability in the metal content in e-waste. So if we calculate the yield based on what metal is left in the residue and what was leached out, and calculate that as the total sum of metals in the system, and then it may be easier to calculate the leaching yields.
To facilitate the recycling of e-waste using your biotechnology, do you have any message to producer industry company?
Who produce e-waste or who produce electronic equipment? Or
Yeah,
I mean, I guess if they can design the product so that they are easy to dismantle and take parts, and if they are also, I guess, labeled well, so that if we want to sort them to certain fractions, so then that would be very helpful in terms of the downstream processing. And yeah, if they can use biodegradable plastics, that would be better.
In Australia, already this communication between recycler and producer has started?
Not quite sure. It's a very good question. Yeah, I'm not sure how much they have talked about that, and whether whether how much of the electronics are actually produced in Australia. Quite a lot might be actually imported from overseas, from other countries to Australia. Yeah, so I'm not sure how much they have discussed and provided feedback in the design of the products.
For example, lithium-ion battery company industry.
Yeah, Australia has typically sort of done a lot of mineral processing and production, but maybe not so much then producing the final end products. So often we have shipped a lot of minerals to overseas for then further processing, but we might not have had so much manufacturing of electronics in Australia.
Okay, international communication is necessary.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
まだまだお話を伺いたいところですけども、そろそろお時間になりました。どうもありがとうございます。Thank you for your presentation and discussion.
Thank you.
非常に勉強になりました。やはり
Thank you.
みんなで一緒になってですよね、リサイクルをしていくっていうことが大変必要なんだなと改めて感じました。ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
そしたらですね、以上をもちまして、九州大学アジア・オセアニア研究機構シンポジウム2022の招待講演の部分は終了します。それで、16時15分よりパラレルセッションに移りますが、その前にここで本シンポジウムでですね、資源循環クラスターを担当しておりますけれども、クラスター長の佐々木先生より一言いただきたいと思います。
はい。以上をもちまして、九州大学アジア・オセアニア研究教育機構シンポジウム 2022SDGs 社会へ向けた資源フロンティアの創造でのすべての招待講演は終了となります。昨日から長きにわたりご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございました。昨日から現時点で延べ約300名の方にご参加をいただきました。人類が快適な生活を享受しながら経済の活性化を実現しようとしますと、エネルギーの制約、物質の制約、環境負荷の最小化は今後ますます大きな課題となっていくと予想されます。現在の経済システムの中でこれらの制約を互いに矛盾なく並立させるということは非常に困難であるということは明らかです。 物や機能を循環使用することによって、経済を活性化させるサーキュラーエコノミーは、その解決法の一つとして注目されていますが、その実現のためには、このような分野の垣根を越えた理解と討論を通して、資源循環に関する共通課題の認識、社会システムの見直し、ひいては学術の再構築も必要となるかもしれません。この公開シンポジウムがさまざまな立場の視聴者の方々の目を開いていただく機会となっていれば幸いに存じます。
はい。佐々木先生、ありがとうございました。この後、16時15分からは、各クラスターですね、によるグループセッションを3つパラレルで実施いたします。セキュリティ、防災、文化変動のセッションはハイブリッドで、会場は稲森ホールで行います。オンラインでの参加も可能です。都市グループのセッションはオンラインのみになっておりますので、ご注意ください。で、各セッションのウェビナー URL はチャットボックスに表示しております。こちらから接続をお願いします。事務局からお送りしているメールにも記載をしておりますので、ご確認ください。それでは、午後の招待講演にご参加いただき、ありがとうございました。この後のグループセッションも引き続きご参加お楽しみいただけたらと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。